Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the scientist who saw too far. We've got a fascinating historical mystery on our hands. We're tracking how an incredibly brilliant 18th century scientific genius completely transformed into a mystic. And the wild part? His influence is literally still sparking new spiritual movements today. We're going to be unpacking a text, specifically focusing on Chapter 1, titled My View of Life, that claims to channel the spirit of this very man, offering a pretty profound critique of our modern world. So let's just jump right in with a question that honestly defies all rational logic. How exactly did a highly respected scientist from the 1700s manage to watch a devastating fire unfold in real time from literally hundreds of miles away? I mean, it's described like he was watching it on a modern flat-screen TV. Now, you might be thinking this is just some old folklore, but it's not. It's a very specific, documented claim explored in our source material today. Section 1. The Impossible Vision, a clairvoyant in Stockholm. To even begin to understand this impossible vision, we first need to meet the man behind the mystery. We are talking about Emanuel Swedenborg. The source text details his really profound journey. Born in Stockholm, Sweden, Swedenborg's lifespan from 1688 to 1772, right there at the dawn of the modern era. And he wasn't just a nobody. The text notes he was an incredibly influential figure across Europe. It got to the point where even the legendary philosopher Immanuel Kant was writing critiques about him and these phenomenal abilities he supposedly had. Section 2. From Science to Spirit, the 18th Century Polymath. Let's take a look at his early years, because his incredibly grounded background is exactly what makes his later supernatural claims so shocking. Just look at the sheer breadth of his scientific resume. The text really emphasizes that Swedenborg wasn't some fringe mystic out looking for magic. Not at all. He was a brilliantly grounded empirical thinker. I mean, he researched natural science extensively. He worked as a hands-on mining engineer, calculating how to extract physical resources from the earth. He made vast, actual contributions to medicine and biology. As we mentioned, his work caught the eye of Immanuel Kant. He was totally a man of data, blueprints, and the scientific method. Honestly, he had a career that, if he were alive today, might earn someone a Nobel Prize. But then, well, everything changed. His life literally split into two distinct halves, and it all revolves around one very specific number: 55. As Chapter 1 explicitly states, and I quote, "At the age of 55, he received a revelation from God, realized the limits of the scientific method, and became active as a spiritualist." And the text gets very specific here, pointing to a direct revelation from Jesus Christ. According to the source, this is when Swedenborg was granted supernatural abilities that literally allowed him to traverse the spirit world. He didn't just abandon science, you see. He felt he had completely transcended its limits. So his life essentially fractures right down the middle. For his first 55 years, he's this empirical researcher and mining engineer, a man of tangible, measurable reality. But for his remaining years, he completely pivots. He becomes a mystic, a clairvoyant, and a spiritual theologian, navigating realms that are just completely beyond our physical senses. Moving on to Section 3, a famous clairvoyant, miracles on record. So what did this new life actually look like? What kind of abilities did he claim to have? The text attributes some rapidly developing, truly astounding abilities to him. We're talking profound out-of-body experiences where he reported leaving his physical form behind to explore other dimensions. There are these documented anecdotes of him locating a hidden will that literally no living family member knew about. He even predicted a factory fire right before it sparked. And of course, most famously, there's his clairvoyant witnessing of the Great Distant Stockholm fire. Let's zoom in on one particularly vivid anecdote from the text. So Swedenborg is reportedly having dinner with an acquaintance, right? Just a normal evening, when suddenly he has this terrifying vision. He tells his dinner companion to rush home immediately because a fire is breaking out at his factory. The guy hops on his horse, races back with incredible urgency, and actually arrives just in time to see the very first sparks igniting, right before the fire could consume the entire building. I mean, that is precision timing, derived entirely from a vision. And these weren't just simple parlor tricks. The source material notes that these visions led to a massive theological output. Swedenborg authored over 100 books documenting his spiritual journeys, the most famous one being Heaven and Hell, or Tenkai Tejigoku. He essentially spent the rest of his life methodically cataloging the spirit world with the exact same precision he used to use for biology and mining. But, as we're about to see, his work definitely didn't end in the 18th century. Section 4. Mission to Modern Japan. A New Spiritual Movement. Now we're going to leap forward in time, straight into the modern era, because the text claims this story is far from over. This brings us to the source book itself. Authored by Ryuho Okawa, this text operates on the fascinating premise that Swedenborg's spirit is actively communicating today to guide humanity. It's essentially a collection of modern channeled messages, picking up exactly where his 18th century writings left off. To fully grasp the context here, we need to define the organization that's facilitating this communication. It's a spiritual movement based in Japan known as Happy Science, or Kofuku no Kagaku. Now, we're looking at this objectively, just analyzing the claims made within the text. And the claim is that high-level spirits, including our guy Swedenborg, are playing a central role in using this movement to deliver urgent, necessary messages to the contemporary world. So what exactly is that urgent message? Well, the spirit offers a pretty sharp, uncompromising critique of modern society, specifically aimed at Japan. The text reads, quote, Japan has taken in only the pathological aspects of Western civilization, rejecting divine truth and spiritual thought, end quote. It argues that while the nation has undeniably achieved immense material and economic success, it has completely dismissed spiritual reality in the process, becoming overly rational, cynical, and just disconnected from the divine. So, this brings us to the crucial point, the ultimate mission stated within this book. The goal isn't just to share some interesting historical anecdotes about an 18th century clairvoyant, not at all. The stated mission is to use these communications to finally prove the reality of the spirit world. It's about combining that intellectual rigor with profound spiritual truth to ignite a brand new spiritual awakening, one that originates in Japan and then spreads globally. Which brings us to a really compelling final question to reflect on, inspired directly by the themes we've covered today. Can a nation's purely material and economic success actually survive long-term without some kind of spiritual awakening? Whether you view Swedenborg as a true visionary or just a fascinating psychological case study, his massive transition from strict empirical science to deep spiritual exploration really challenges us to consider where the boundaries of our own reality truly lie. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we're going on a wild, highly structured journey straight into the metaphysical. We're going to impartially unpack the spiritual revelations of Emanuel Swedenborg, the brilliant scientist and philosopher whose later visions literally mapped out the afterlife. We'll be looking specifically at a fascinating translation of these concepts from a curated spiritual text. So if you've ever found yourself wondering about the actual architecture of the spirit realm, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's get into it. So think about this. What actually happens to love, relationships, and even gender after we leave our physical bodies behind? Like, do we lose our identity completely, or does it just evolve into something else? This right here is the core esoteric theme of the text we're diving into today. And honestly, the answers provided by these revelations are so incredibly detailed and, quite frankly, completely mind-bending.
So, to make sense of it all, we'll quickly cover gender traits after death, spiritual wavelengths and perception, dominance in the hell realm, empathetic marriage in the 4th through 6th dimensions, merged spirits in higher dimensions, and finally, the modern collapse of soul siblings.
All right, starting off with Section 1, Gender Traits After Death.
Okay, so according to the text, does gender survive the death of the physical body? The answer is a resounding yes, but probably not in the way you might think. See, in the lower and intermediate realms, spirits do often keep a sort of human-like appearance. But as spirits ascend and evolve higher up, they might not even possess a human shape anymore. We're talking formless spheres of light. Yet, and this is the cool part, even if a spirit is just a shapeless sphere, its gender can be instantly felt by others just through the energy or the wavelength it emits.
The source text contrasts these spiritual traits really clearly. When you encounter a male spirit, the overwhelming sensations you'd feel are strength, activeness, and power, just pushing right to the forefront. On the flip side, encountering a female spirit emits this distinct softness, grace, and incredibly deep sensitivity. The text even notes that certain female spirits possess a profound, radiant beauty that goes way beyond anything physical. It's an energetic signature. You just feel it. Moving on to Section 2, Spiritual Wavelengths and Perception. Now, here in the physical world, you can bump into literally anyone on the street, right? Doesn't matter what their mindset is. But in the spirit world, the text explains that you only perceive those on your exact energetic frequency. This is called dimensional awareness. The source material actually uses a great metaphor for this. Think of how a ghost is said to pass effortlessly right through a physical wall. If you have mismatched mindsets in the spirit world, it's basically the ultimate form of getting ghosted. You'll literally pass right through one another, completely unnoticed. You are only aware of what you resonate with. Which brings us to Section 3, Dominance in the Hell Realm.
So, because spirits in the lowest dimensions operate on extremely low frequencies that are totally devoid of empathy, the concept of marriage down there takes on a really dark definition. The text outlines that relationships in hellish realms are not based on affection at all. Instead, they are driven purely by power dynamics and fear. Basically, one spirit typically forces the other into subservience, treating them essentially as property or forced labor. It's a relationship of pure domination, which unfortunately perfectly reflects the exact spiritual wavelength of that environment.
But let's look at Section 4, Empathetic Marriage in the 4th through 6th dimensions. What's really fascinating here is the complete 180-degree inversion of that dynamic we just talked about. In the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimensions, spirits operate on a much higher, far more empathetic wavelength. Up here, spiritual marriages mirror the absolute most idealized earthly relationships. Instead of domination and fear, couples in these dimensions live together based on mutual empathy, encouragement, and the shared desire for spiritual growth. They are actively uplifting one another constantly. Now things get wild in Section 5, Merge Spirits in Higher Dimensions.
Okay, get this. The text makes a fascinating assertion about the higher dimensions, specifically the 7th dimension and above. Up there, love and unity reach a level that is almost, well, beyond human comprehension. Couples don't just live side by side in harmony. They literally merge together into a single, comprehensive spiritual entity. No, really. The text refers to this astonishing phenomenon as the creation of a merged spirit.
And here is how this incredible process builds, step by step. First, there has to be an intense mutual desire where the two souls actually no longer wish to pursue separate individualities. Second, the souls undergo a metaphysical docking process, basically uniting their distinct male and female energies into one perfectly balanced, unified whole. And third, this ultimate union actually acts as a mechanism for ascension. This newly combined, highly evolved soul can then ascend together into the Tathagata, which is the pristine 8th dimension.
Finally, Section 6, The Collapse of Soul Siblings.
Historically, the text says a soul is not meant to be entirely isolated. It belongs to a traditional soul sibling structure. Think of it as a group of 6, 1 core soul and 5 branch souls. Under normal cosmic conditions, these 6 souls basically take turns reincarnating on Earth to gather experiences and support each other's continuous spiritual growth. It's this beautifully structured cosmic rotation.
But, and this is a big but, the revelations impartially report a severe, massive disruption happening in our modern era. According to the text, an increasing number of souls are failing to ascend after their earthly lives, and they're falling instead into the lower hellish realms. Because of this, that 6-person rotation we just talked about is fundamentally breaking down. When one sibling gets trapped in a lower dimension, the others who remain on Earth or in the heavenly realms get completely cut off. They're left spiritually stranded, missing a vital part of their eternal family.
And honestly, this brings all our concepts completely full circle today. Because of the collapse of the traditional soul-sibling system, spiritual marriage becomes an absolute necessity. It's kind of a cosmic backup plan. When isolated souls can no longer reunite with their original core group, they desperately seek out other souls with deeply aligned wavelengths. By forming these new, powerful bonds of spiritual marriage, these affiliated souls ensure they don't have to face eternity alone. It allows them to fiercely continue their journey of survival, growth, and eventual ascension. It's just such a profound system of cosmic balance, constantly adapting to the spiritual state of humanity. And it leaves us with a pretty intense question. If the afterlife is truly governed, not by physical proximity, but by the exact wavelength of your mind and heart, who is your true spiritual counterpart? It's definitely a lingering thought, one that invites us to look really closely at our own energies, our own wavelengths, and the profound connections we're cultivating right now. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep exploring the unknown.
Welcome back, focused learners, to another deep dive on the explainer. Today we are unpacking something truly mind-bending. we're looking at a text that claims to be the posthumous revelations of Emanuel Swedenborg, one of the 18th century's most brilliant scientists, philosophers, and Christian theologians. Specifically, we're zeroing in on a pivotal section, Chapter 3, where Swedenborg essentially takes his own life's work, tears it down, and completely reconstructs it from the other side. Let's just jump right in. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine being a master scholar. You spend your entire earthly life intensely studying theology, you write volumes of work, and you build this massive, rock-solid reputation as a spiritual authority. And then you pass away. You enter the afterlife, and you make a staggering discovery. Your central thesis, like your entire working concept of God, had a massive blind spot. How would you react to that? Would you double down, or would you try to set the record straight? Well, according to the source text we're analyzing today, Swedenborg's reaction was incredibly humble. The text actually quotes him directly, saying, "I am keenly aware that my concept of God was still very immature." I mean, wow, that is a shocking admission from such a towering historical figure in Christian mysticism. It absolutely sets the stage for a massive paradigm shift. He's not here to pat himself on the back, right? He's communicating specifically to reform and upgrade his own earthly worldview based on new, higher dimensional evidence he's seeing firsthand. Section 1. Redefining Creator, a Paradigm Shift. Okay, so to ground us in the source material, our focus is right here on Chapter 3, which is titled Christianity and I. This entire chapter is dedicated to him dismantling his earthly assumptions. It's right here that he takes the foundational pillars of traditional Christian dogma, stuff he himself used to firmly believe, and really starts to test them against the actual reality of the spiritual realms he's now fully experiencing. And this perfectly illustrates exactly where that theological pivot happens. So in his traditional earthly view, Swedenborg believed that the absolute creator, the ultimate source of everything, literally squeezed down into physical form here on earth. But his newly revealed spiritual view separates these concepts. He now states that the absolute creator is an immensely higher dimensional being. Any personalized God with human characteristics, that's actually secondary. The ultimate creator doesn't just take on a localized human body. Obviously, this is a massive update to his theology. Section 2. Truth about Jesus. Redefining the Messiah. So if the absolute creator is this higher dimensional being, where does that leave Jesus? Well, he redefines him with a pretty crucial distinction. The text explains that Jesus Christ is not the absolute creator in totality. Instead, Jesus was a physical incarnation of a portion of a higher dimensional God. He describes him as a soul incredibly close to the creator, sent out almost like a fractal or an extension, but not the entirety of the universe's ultimate architect walking around in sandals. It preserves the divinity of Jesus, for sure, but it radically expands the scale of the absolute God. Now, what's really fascinating here is the working relationship the text describes. Swedenborg doesn't just analyze Jesus from afar. He claims a deeply personal connection. The text outlines that Swedenborg actually supported Jesus from the spiritual realm. He acted as this unseen bridge, collaborating to help convey these massive spiritual teachings to humanity across different eras. They were, in a sense, spiritual co-workers trying to elevate human consciousness. Section 3. Past Life Reveal. A Surprising Identity. Okay, I want you to actively guess for a second. If a soul is continuously reincarnating to help elevate humanity's spiritual understanding, and this soul eventually becomes the absolute genius Emanuel Swedenborg in the 18th century, who was he before that? Like, who was he during the pivotal biblical times he wrote so much about? Well, the text explicitly unveils an astonishing historical identity. He explains that his soul has continuously worked as a bridge between the spiritual and physical worlds, taking on different roles in different eras. And during the time of Jesus, yeah, he was right there in the thick of it. Boom, there it is. The text claims directly, John the Baptist, who is also a figure from my past life, Swedenborg states that his soul previously incarnated as the iconic prophet who paved the way for Jesus. No way, right? And it doesn't stop there. The text also astonishingly reveals he had another past life as the Japanese monk Genshin, demonstrating this incredibly vast, cross-cultural spiritual footprint. But bringing it back to this biblical connection, it completely recontextualizes everything we just talked about. When he said he worked with Jesus to elevate humanity,
He meant it both from the spiritual realm and literally right there on the muddy banks of the Jordan River.
So let's see how this builds on biblical history. You might remember the biblical prophecy that the ancient prophet Elijah would return before the Messiah. In the Bible, Jesus tells his followers that Elijah has already come, and it's largely understood he was speaking metaphorically about John the Baptist. Well, Swedenborg's text asserts that this wasn't just a poetic metaphor, it was spiritual reality. John the Baptist was a reincarnation meant to fulfill the role of Elijah, and that very same soul later became Swedenborg. It's an incredible, continuous thread of spiritual duty.
Section 4, a new mission. Scientific spirituality.
So, the crucial point here is the text outlining his realization that his beloved Christianity, while beautiful in so many ways, had significant structural flaws. There were missing puzzle pieces that he feels an absolute, urgent duty to fix from the other side. He believes humanity is finally ready for a more advanced, complete picture. He methodically breaks down these blind spots. First, he notes that while traditional Christianity is beautifully sacrificial, it has a fundamentally sorrowful, painful, and lonely undercurrent. Because of this, it often feels incompatible with living a joyful earthly life. It kind of makes people feel like they have to reject the physical world to be spiritual, that exploring the spirit means turning your back on science and earthly progress. And most importantly, he says, it completely lacks a framework for empirical truth. It relies entirely on blind faith. And that brings us to the very purpose of this book. This entire text is his vehicle for correcting those historical blind spots. Remember, Swedenborg was a massive scientific figure, a mining engineer, an anatomist, an inventor, before he ever had a spiritual awakening. He doesn't want to discard science, he wants to synthesize it with spirituality. He outlines a very specific 3-step master plan for this mission. Step 1. Explicitly reveal the hidden spiritual truths that traditional dogma completely missed or misunderstood. Step 2, inject a literal new wind of fresh thought into theology, clearing away those sorrowful anti-earthly cobwebs. And step 3, which is really his ultimate goal, to transform the afterlife from a spooky, mysterious realm into a place of empirical, scientific exploration. He wants us to study the spirit world as rigorously as we study physics or biology. I really want to emphasize this triumphant conclusion directly from the text. He declares, it is not a world obtained only by completely unknown faith, but a world that has become capable of exploration. He is basically demanding that we stop settling for blind belief. He's offering a framework where the spiritual world is as real, as structured, and as explorable as the physical universe. Which leaves us with this final, lingering question. If what this text proposes is true, if the afterlife is not just a matter of blind faith, but an actual structured realm of empirical exploration, how does that change the way you view your everyday existence right now? If spirituality and science aren't enemies, but just two sides of the same explorable reality, what will we discover next? Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer for this incredible journey through Swedenborg's posthumous paradigm shift. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.
Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into something pretty wild today. We are going to objectively map out a deeply visceral, highly specific cosmology of the afterlife, drawing directly from a fascinating source text that claims to reveal the hidden mechanics of the underworld. Specifically, we'll be breaking down Chapter 4, titled The Hell Realm I Saw. It's an incredibly detailed look at the spatial structure and the underlying spiritual laws of hell. So let's jump right in and map this out.
Now, to really understand this vast, organized empire of suffering, we got to start at the absolute bottom. So, who is actually running the show down there? The source reveals that the lowest depths aren't just chaotic, random pits of fire. They're actually highly organized syndicates.
Here's our roadmap for the descent. We'll start with the deepest abyss, explore the trap of free will, uncover the hell of lust, witness the descent into the animal realm, and finally, reveal the core law governing the whole thing.
All right, Section 1. The deepest abyss, Lucifer's stronghold. Picture the very bottom of hell as this massive, twisted corporate headquarters. The guy at the top? Lucifer. And he commands this vast network of subordinate Satans who act like dark branch managers all over the world. But get this, who do you think these dark leaders were when they were alive on Earth? You'd probably guess historical dictators or serial killers, right? Well, actually,
Look at this breakdown.
A staggering 70% of these underworld bosses are actually fallen religious figures. Yeah, individuals who were supposed to provide spiritual guidance but completely misled their followers. The rest of the pie is mostly made up of corrupt politicians and military leaders, and the text notes that during earthly wars or violent revolutions, the supply of these dark managers actually spikes, and they end up dragging all their misguided followers right down into the abyss with them.
Moving on to Section 2, The Trap of Free Will, Deception in the Abyss.
So here is where it gets incredibly psychological. These fallen leaders, they don't use medieval torture devices or iron chains to keep souls trapped. No, they use intellectual manipulation. They systematically take a soul's earthly cravings, whether that's fame, money, or lust, and they just amplify it. They deploy this chilling philosophical weapon to convince their victims that giving in to those dark urges is actually the ultimate form of liberation.
And this is their ultimate trap, the illusion of free will. The dark entities will literally say this to their victims, telling them, hey, you are a child of God, so you are completely free to do whatever you want. The deception is so deep that these figures will even disguise themselves as angels of light or literally impersonate Jesus Christ just to convince a soul that being completely selfish is some sort of divine right. It's a total brilliant subversion of faith.
Which brings us to Section 3, The Hell of Lust, Violence Disguised as Art.
As we move up just a bit from that absolute bottom abyss, we hit these highly specialized zones. In the Hell of Lust, that twisted concept of freedom we just talked about is practiced with zero restraint, but it's often cloaked as artistic expression. We're talking about people who spent their lives obsessing over capturing base desires. Pornographers, erotic film directors, twisted photographers. They end up here, completely stripped of human dignity. And the ultimate irony? They're trapped in an endless loop, still desperately trying to film and capture these chaotic acts.
Next up is Section 4, Descent into the Animal Realm, Losing Humanity.
Now, this intense obsession with base desires literally bleeds over into an adjacent zone known as the animal realm, and this is where the loss of humanity gets brutally literal. The horrific irony here is just mind-blowing. In their own minds, these souls honestly believe they are beautiful, free, and passionately engaging in acts of human love, but to any outside observer with spiritual sight, they appear as grotesque, writhing monsters. Their delusion is so thick it completely shields them from their own hideous reality.
I mean, humans literally shapeshift into the beasts that match their earthly vices. The author graphically describes seeing souls manifesting as giant male and female snakes completely tangled together, or people literally chasing each other around as pigs and dogs. Depending on their specific corrupted beliefs, or even the regional myths they obsessed over in life, some take the form of foxes, werewolves, or vampires. They've entirely surrendered the dignity of being human just to serve their base instincts.
And finally, Section 5, The Core Law of Hell, the Metaphysics of the Underworld.
So how exactly does a human soul morph into a giant snake? We have to look at the underlying physics of this whole cosmology. The core law here is that hell is absolutely not some physical jail built by an outside punisher. It's an inescapable, highly literal projection of a soul's own corrupted inner state. Your mindset dictates your shape, your surroundings, your entire reality. And according to the text, true faith is literally the only escape hatch from this self-generated nightmare.
Because the spiritual gravity is absolute, the environment is constantly reacting to you. If a soul fully embraces evil, they literally drop like a stone into deeper, pitch-black realms. It gets so intense that some souls become entirely paralyzed by their own dark thoughts. They end up totally immobile, stuck like a solitary reed buried in a dark swamp, completely alone in the void.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer on this truly striking vision of the afterlife. When we realize that this cosmology presents a world where every single hidden thought, every secret desire instantly becomes our physical reality, well, it leaves us with a pretty profound and unsettling question. If this core law kicked in for you right now, if your current inner mindset instantly dictated your physical form and environment, what kind of world would you be standing in? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope it gave you a fascinating new perspective on the mechanics of the underworld.
Welcome to another explainer. Today, we are unpacking something absolutely wild, Emanuel Swedenborg's highly complex mechanism of reincarnation. Seriously, this spiritual system is going to completely challenge how you think about your own life, your history, and even your own soul. Okay, let's dive right in by asking a question that totally flips our standard understanding of the soul on its head. What if your individual consciousness, like the exact you that is listening to me right now, isn't the whole picture? What if you're actually just one tiny fraction of a massive, overarching spiritual entity, and you're just taking your turn down here on Earth? Section 1, Breaking from Simple Reincarnation. We are drawing directly from Swedenborg's revelations here. And right off the bat, you should know this is a spiritual system entirely absent from standard Christian doctrine. He looked at the spiritual laws and realized that a basic, simple reincarnation model just didn't explain the vast, incredible diversity of human experience. The core difference is mind-blowing. It's not a single entity looping endlessly on its own through time. Instead, it's a massive composite structure sending out a fraction of itself. The text actually uses a great analogy for this. Think of the total soul as an octopus. Instead of the whole octopus jumping into a new physical body, which, let's be honest, sounds pretty chaotic, the octopus stays safe in the spiritual realm and just extends one single tentacle down into the physical world at a time. Section 2, the concept of soul siblings. So this builds into what the text calls soul siblings. The crucial takeaway here is that your soul is not a solitary lone wolf unit. You are part of a tightly knit spiritual group formed way back in the distant past. You belong to a collective, a complex composite entity made up of a main body and several branch bodies that all share a deep, fundamental spiritual DNA. According to the text, in the mid-level spiritual realms, what he calls the sixth dimension and below, these groups usually consist of about 6 parts. So you have one main central body and 5 branch bodies. And yes, you are likely one of those branches. But here's the catch. The whole group doesn't come down to Earth all at once. They take turns. So while you are down here living your life, navigating the physical world, the other 5 members of your soul sibling group are hanging back in the spiritual realm, supporting you and waiting for their turn. Section 3, Metaphor, Ferris wheel and water wheel. Visualizing a multi-dimensional soul group taking turns on Earth is honestly pretty tough to wrap your head around, but the text gives us this fantastic mechanical analogy. Imagine a giant Ferris wheel that acts like a water wheel. The massive wheel turns and one single carriage descends. It dips into a small pool of water at the bottom, moves through it, and then rotates back up into the sky. In this metaphor, that water represents the physical world, and entering it is the act of taking on a physical body. Let's break that down completely. The massive structure of the wheel, that's your total consciousness, your entire soul group. Earth is just that tiny pool of water at the very bottom. And that single carriage dipping into the water, that is one physical incarnation. That's you, right now. As the wheel turns, you get wet, you gather earthly experiences, and then you rotate back up, bringing all that unique, hard-earned knowledge back to the massive total consciousness. The problem is, because of our extremely limited earthly perspective, it's like looking through a tiny knothole in a piece of wood. We can only see the one carriage that is currently in the water. We look at a single human life and we think, oh, well, that's it. That's the whole person. We completely miss the giant spiritual wheel operating silently above us in the background. We mistake the fraction for the whole shebang. But all of this raises a massive question. Why such a complex system? I mean, why not just use a simple cycle of reincarnation where one soul repeats lives back to back to back? Why bother with the giant wheel, the soul siblings, and taking turns? Section 4, Seeing the World Through Diverse Windows. So why the complexity? Well, the answer lies in the ultimate purpose of spiritual evolution. The text lays it out clearly. True spiritual evolution isn't just about repeating lives over and over. If a soul just repeated the exact same type of existence, it would result in a very low level of self-awareness. True evolution requires gathering highly diverse experiences across different eras, environments, and even genders. The ultimate goal is to expand into a vast, almost godlike composite entity, connecting closer and closer to the life of the entire universe itself. I absolutely love this quote from the text. It says, "To know God's world, we must change eras and environments to create new windows." Every physical body you inhabit is essentially a brand new window, carefully crafted to observe a totally different slice of existence. Because think about it, you just can't see the whole universe looking out of only one window. And this shift in perspective is a real game changer. What feels to us like 300 to 500 agonizing years of waiting between earthly lives that's described as just a brief passing instant to the divine observer. It's literally just the fraction of a second it takes for that massive total consciousness to shift its gaze from one window to the next. Ultimately, the massive soul extends its branches to act as sensory organs. It says, "We are sent out as eyes, feet, hands, and windows to experience various eras and locations." You are out there doing the groundwork. You're gathering the data, the complex emotions, the physical sensations, all to expand the total joy and awareness of your greater self. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to carry with you today. If your current life is just one window, and you are just one carriage dipping into the water for a vast, composite soul, what unique earthly experience are you bringing back to the wheel today? Think about this specific view your window offers, because, according to Swedenborg, it is an absolutely essential piece of a massive cosmic puzzle. Thanks for joining me to explore this incredible concept, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because, honestly, we are looking at something truly mind-bending. Have you ever wondered if the spiritual realm isn't just, something you're supposed to blindly believe in, but something that is actively, deliberately trying to prove its existence to us? Well, today, we're unpacking a bold and totally fascinating source text that claims exactly that. According to this framework, the unseen world is actually orchestrating a massive, multi-front campaign to wake up modern humanity. Think of it kind of like a radio station broadcasting an incredibly powerful signal. Just because our current scientific dials aren't tuned to that specific frequency yet doesn't mean the music isn't playing. We are going to explore how medicine, theoretical physics, and, yes, even space travel are supposedly being utilized as deliberate tools by the spirit world to bridge that ultimate gap, the one between science and faith.
Let's dive right into this by posing a fundamental question that the source material asks us to really deeply consider. Are test tubes and laboratories truly the only ways to measure reality? For centuries, modern science has relied almost entirely on the physical senses. The rule has basically been, if we can't see it, touch it, or measure it with our physical instruments, it just doesn't exist, period. But what if our scientific tools are just temporarily limited? Remember, there was a time when the medical establishment openly mocked germ theory. Actually, the idea that microscopic invisible bugs cause disease seemed like literal magical thinking to them, simply because they couldn't be seen with the naked eye. So what if we're facing a similar blind spot today? Keep that historical precedent in the back of your mind as we journey through today's analysis and explore a universe that might be far, far larger than our current tools can measure.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The limits of materialism. 2. Medicine's spiritual awakening. 3. Physics meets multidimensions. 4. UFOs, travelers of spirit. And 5. Unifying science and religion.
Our journey begins directly with Chapter 6 of our source material, which is appropriately titled Between Science and Religion. This specific chapter serves as the absolute foundation for our explainer today. It outlines the precise arguments for why the supposedly impenetrable wall between the physical and the spiritual is actively coming down right now. And more importantly, it gives us the explicit blueprint for how the spiritual realm is intervening in our physical world to make this huge paradigm shift happen. We aren't just talking about abstract philosophy here. The text is pointing to distinct, observable shifts happening right now in our highest scientific institutions.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the limits of materialism.
Before we look at the incredible solutions the source proposes, we absolutely have to understand the core problem it identifies within the current scientific community. Materialistic science is currently trapped in what the text beautifully calls a habit of the soul. For generations, scientists have been conditioned to only value what comes out of a laboratory or a test tube. Because of this deeply ingrained habit, they often end up instantly laughing off or just dismissing anything they can't physically experiment on. They logically yet, according to the text, incorrectly conclude that truth only exists in the physical three-dimensional world. But the text aggressively advocates for what it calls future science. Now, this future science doesn't discard the rigorous scientific method at all. Actually, it radically expands it to incorporate multidimensional realities and the existence of the human soul. The core argument here is incredibly straightforward. You simply cannot fully understand the universe if you arbitrarily cut off half of it just because your current instruments are too primitive to measure it.
Moving right along to Section 2, Medicine's Spiritual Awakening. So, how does this transition from a rigid habit of the soul to a new awakened science actually begin? Well, the text asserts that the spiritual realm isn't just passively waiting for us to figure this out on our own. Instead, they're actively initiating a massive paradigm shift, starting directly on the front lines of life and death, the medical field.
Conventionally, we might view near-death experiences, or NDEs, as strange medical anomalies or maybe simply the chemical hallucinations of a dying brain. However, the source material completely reframes them. It claims that NDEs are actually part of a deliberately orchestrated spiritual boom, and the ultimate goal? To absolutely shock materialistic doctors. Just imagine medical professionals who have spent decades firmly believing that consciousness ends the exact second the physical body dies, suddenly being confronted with an overwhelming wave of verifiable accounts. Imagine a patient who was completely flatlined, clinically dead, suddenly waking up and accurately describing the specific, highly specialized tools the surgeon used while they were entirely unconscious. Mind-blowing, right?
The text explicitly mentions intense, high-stakes fields like heart surgery as a primary battleground for this scientific awakening. It notes that human beings aren't just flesh and bone functioning through physical organs. There's a deep, highly complex, intrinsic connection between the soul and these bodily systems. Imagine the immense cognitive dissonance of a top-tier surgeon who literally holds a stopped heart in their hands, fully believing the patient is gone forever, only to have that same patient later recount the exact word-for-word conversation the surgical team had while the monitors were totally flat. It forces a complete rewiring of their worldview. The source strongly suggests that by actively exposing these brilliant, scientifically minded doctors to inexplicable phenomena, the spiritual realm is strategically forcing the scientific community to critically question their purely physical worldview. It is a highly calculated strategy to plant undeniable seeds of spiritual awareness right in the beating heart of modern medicine.
Which brings us to Section 3. Physics meets multi-dimensions.
But you know, the human body and medical anomalies are really just one frontier in this grand campaign. To truly convince the global scientific establishment, anecdotal evidence isn't going to cut it. You need concrete math. You need to rewrite the underlying code of the universe. If the spiritual world actually exists, how do we describe it scientifically? Well, the text points directly to multidimensional physics. To grasp this, imagine a 2D stick figure drawn on a flat piece of paper, trying to comprehend a 3D cube hovering right above it. To the stick figure, the cube is invisible, magical, or just flat out impossible. But it's not magic, it's just a higher dimension. Our source argues that theoretical physics isn't just a bunch of brilliant humans doing abstract math. It's a theoretical framework that is actively being inspired by the spirit world. The ultimate idea here is to provide modern humanity with the foundational mathematical proof that a higher dimensional spiritual realm is structurally verifiable.
The strategy here is absolutely fascinating. The text asserts that the spiritual realm is deliberately planting sudden flashes of insight into the minds of world-famous physicists, much like Albert Einstein in his era, to generate groundbreaking theoretical papers. There is a wonderful, almost humorous irony here, don't you think? Some of the smartest, most rigidly scientific minds in the entire world might actually be taking dictation from spirits without even knowing it. These brilliant scientists feverishly write out complex equations about multidimensional space and quantum mechanics, perhaps never quite realizing that they are effectively drawing up the architectural blueprints of the spirit world. By working directly through these top-tier physicists, the spiritual realm ensures that the concept of existence is far beyond our tiny three-dimensional reality gains legitimate, rigorous, unquestionable scientific backing.
All right, Section 4, UFOs, Travelers of Spirit.
Now, if medicine provides the biological evidence of a soul, and theoretical physics provides the mathematical framework for higher dimensions, how do we actually see this multidimensional reality in action? Listen closely to this direct concept from the source text. Quote, "Traveling vast distances in three-dimensional space is nearly impossible, even at light speed. They arrive by passing through four-dimensional space and beyond." End quote. Think about the immense gravity of that statement for a second. This perfectly encapsulates the core limitation of our current scientific thinking. If we look up at the stars using only standard three-dimensional rules, visiting Earth from distant galaxies takes millions of years. It seems entirely, completely impossible.
Because of that, the text radically redefines what UFOs actually are. They are not merely hyper-advanced physical ships slowly and painfully crossing the vast, empty vacuum of deep space. Instead, they are actual multi-dimensional vehicles. But how does that even work? Well, think of a flat piece of paper with a dot on each end. Traveling across the paper takes time, right? But if you fold that piece of paper, those two distant points touch instantly. That fold is a higher dimension. The source argues that highly advanced extraterrestrials possess the technological mastery to navigate through this four-dimensional space, which, by the way, the text very directly equates with the spiritual realm itself. By utilizing this incredible dimensional shortcut, jumping into the spiritual plane, they can completely bypass the massive physical constraints of linear distance and arrive at Earth in a single instant.
And this is where the entire framework clicks together in an absolutely brilliant way.
UFOs and alien visitations aren't some separate fringe scientific study. They are the ultimate, vital evidence of the spiritual realm. The text claims that extraterrestrials are actively making contact to share this incredibly advanced extraterrestrial knowledge with us. Their very arrival, their physics-defying technology, proves something monumental. It proves that what we on Earth call religion, the realm of spirits, souls, and higher dimensions, and what we call science, technology, mathematics, and space travel, are actually the exact same thing once your civilization possesses the right technology and understanding. They have literally, physically crossed the supposedly unbreakable boundary between science and religion. No way, right? It's a real game changer.
And finally, Section 5, Unifying Science and Religion.
By logically bringing together the deeply shocking evidence from medicine, the rigorous math from quantum physics, and the undeniable physical proof of multidimensional travel from ufology, we finally arrive at the author's ultimate conclusion. The text definitively declares that true future science can only be born when the artificial wall between materialistic science and spiritual religion completely dissolves. By finally accepting the medical anomalies of near-death experiences, the higher dimensional math of theoretical physics, and the multidimensional nature of extraterrestrial travel, humanity can finally elevate its understanding of the universe. As long as our science stubbornly refuses to look beyond our tiny three-dimensional world, our understanding of reality is going to remain tragically incomplete. The source material vehemently argues that the spirit world is working overtime across all these multiple scientific disciplines to give us the exact clues we need to tear down that wall once and for all.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. When science finally catches up, when we develop the sophisticated tools to properly map, perfectly measure, and physically traverse the spirit world, will it still be called religion, or will it simply be known as the total, undeniable reality of our magnificent universe? It is a truly fascinating framework that entirely shifts how we view the vast unknown. Thank you so much for taking the time to deeply explore this thought-provoking source material with me today. Keep questioning the world around you, keep pushing the boundaries of what you're learning, and I will see you in the next explainer.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, honestly, we are unpacking something truly fascinating. We're looking at a highly cinematic, incredibly detailed text that outlines a massive spiritual movement, one that literally claims to be aimed at altering the course of human history. We're diving straight into Chapter 7 of the Swedenborg Revelations, specifically focusing on the revelations of the heavenly realm. It is a wild, visually stunning ride, so let's get right into it.
Here is the source text we'll be drawing from today. Now, just to be super clear right up front, we are impartially analyzing the accounts exactly as they're laid out in this book. We aren't here to endorse or debate the spiritual validity of any of this. Instead, our goal is to just understand the highly esoteric, breathtakingly vivid narrative that the author constructs right here in Chapter 7. Honestly, it reads almost like an epic fantasy or a sci-fi blockbuster, but it's presented as a profound spiritual vision.
Now I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine a reality where you can no longer just open your mouth and speak. How do you share an idea? How do you organize a movement? How do spirits communicate when spoken words, at least as we know them, no longer exist? This is the fundamental question the text answers first, basically setting the operational rules for this whole heavenly realm.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, Heavenly Communication, or the World of Representations.
The mechanics of how the author describes spirit communication are just incredibly unique. The text introduces this concept called representations. Basically, in this heavenly realm, communication relies entirely on these representations. Instead of spoken language, spirits use telepathic, highly symbolic images. Imagine looking up and seeing clouds suddenly morph into specific shapes, or literal giant letters appearing in the atmosphere. It's this purely visual, broadcasted form of telepathy where your thoughts literally become the landscape around you.
Let's walk through exactly how the source outlines this three-step process. Step 1. A spirit simply holds a really strong desire to communicate a message. Step 2. Those internal thoughts begin to physically manifest in the spiritual environment as visual symbols. The text specifically uses the example of clouds shifting and changing shape. And then Step 3. Actual words or vivid images crystallize directly in the sky for the intended recipient to see. It's kind of like having a gigantic telepathic billboard that only activates when a spirit needs to send a message.
Now, what's really interesting is the specific example the narrator provides to prove this concept. The narrator recounts watching this glowing red mass gather in the sky, which then deliberately transforms into readable red text. And the text essentially reads, "The sun rises in the eastern country." This isn't just a random message, right? It's a profound prophetic signal that basically sets the stage for the rest of the narrator's visionary journey. The communication system is actively steering him somewhere.
And that brings us to Section 2, the prophet's arrival and a golden carriage in the sky.
So this is where the narrative scale deliberately begins to escalate. The sky isn't just sending text messages anymore, it's literally delivering visitors. With the sky acting as this dynamic, magical canvas, who do you think drops in next? The text builds incredible anticipation here, pulling a major historical and biblical figure right into the narrator's immediate view.
According to the text, it is none other than the prophet Elijah. But he doesn't just, walk up, he arrives in an extraordinarily cinematic fashion. The source specifically describes Elijah descending in a brilliant, gleaming golden carriage. And if that wasn't epic enough, this golden carriage is being drawn through the sky by a mystical Pegasus. No way, right? The specific, vivid details here really serve to underscore the immense importance and authority of this visitation.
And Elijah doesn't just stop by to say hello. He comes with a highly specific, weighty inquiry. He looks at the narrator and asks, "Are you willing to undertake the task of sending spiritual messages?" He is flat out inviting the narrator to partake in a massive new mission of spiritual communication. Elijah is essentially recruiting him for a job that will bridge this heavenly realm of representations with the physical world below.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the Heavenly Army, El Cantare, and Jesus Christ.
If you thought a golden carriage was grand, well, the text suddenly blows the doors off the narrative scale. The visionary looks past Elijah and suddenly witnesses a vast angelic army standing in strict military formation. And the text provides a very specific headcount here, approximately 3,000 angels. This number is totally crucial because it shifts the entire scene from a peaceful, heavenly gathering into a tactical, strategic mobilization. And get this, these 3,000 angels are fully armed. The text vividly details their weaponry, noting that they are wielding swords made of precious materials. We're talking gold swords, silver swords, and breathtaking diamond swords. This imagery of jewel-encrusted weaponry creates a really profound juxtaposition. Like, yes, it's an army, but it is an army of ultimate purity, absolute light, and high spiritual authority.
The narrator observes this awe-inspiring sight and concludes, "It seems the heavenly forces commanded by Jesus are finally about to begin a massive undertaking." And this brilliantly illustrates the core thrust of Chapter 7. We aren't just passively observing heaven anymore. This is the revelation of a battle plan. A strategic, massive spiritual undertaking is actively being launched under the absolute highest of commands.
Alongside Jesus, the text introduces another supreme authority overseeing this cosmic event, El Cantare. The source describes El Cantare as a massive, noble, and radiantly golden presence who holds an overarching guiding authority over this entire mission. This figure essentially represents the ultimate spiritual anchor for the massive movement being mobilized by that 3,000-strong army.
Which leads us to Section 4, the Eastern Epicenter, and a mission from Japan.
So where exactly is this immense army heading? Elijah's golden carriage takes the narrator on a rapid flight across the globe, flying past the Middle East and heading directly toward the East. So the crucial point here is the geographic and historical shift the text is establishing. Historically, as the narrator reflects, previous spiritual missions and epicenters were deeply rooted in the West and in Europe. But this new massive undertaking? It's deliberately breaking from history. It is centered entirely in the East, specifically Japan.
Upon seeing this final destination, the narrator has a profound realization, stating, "In this Eastern country, my work begins." The entire spectacular journey, from learning how to read red text in the sky, to meeting Elijah on a Pegasus, to witnessing that vast angelic army, it was all to bring him to this single point. Modern-day Japan is revealed as the epicenter, the ultimate launchpad for a massive spiritual shift intended to alter human history. So what does this all mean? Well, this brings us to a really compelling final thought. Regardless of where you personally stand on the theology, the narrative scale here is just undeniable. How will claims of a 3,000-strong heavenly army launching a new spiritual mission from Japan influence modern history, global belief systems, or even the people who follow this text? It's an epic concept that bridges ancient prophetic imagery with modern geography. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the text today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.